The List, Part 3. It stepped to the barrier of the circle across from Hans. He raised a hand towards the German officer, but did not place it on him. Miles saw silver sparks alight in the air between man and creature. "The circle compels you to stay," Hans said, as if reporting the results of the weekend's cricket scores. Miles could see the impossibly large muscles on the creature's back bunch and release before it answered.
"I will stay. I will hear your command."
Hans slapped his hands together and did a small jig, feet rising and falling in place. "Yes, yes, dear servant, you will have my command. I call on you to raise and enslave to me those demons I have named, to avenge the fatherland, and lead it to victory when we march again." Demons. Well, why not, Miles thought. He wondered now not only how he would survive all the night had thrown at him, but how he would even begin to explain the truth of the list the Germans had won to their keeping. It was a soldier's resolve that saved him, an automatic thing for Miles, for which he was grateful right now. Truth was, his fingers shook so badly as to make him doubt he could tie his own laces at that moment. He imagined the words he'd report to his masters. "You see, sir, it's a list of names, of demons, who the new warmongers of Germany plan to throw at us to assure their complete victory in a new world war. Perfectly reasonable." Well, assuming he did live through the night, some fact-checking couldn't hurt. "The list, it's what, Hans?" Miles asked across the circle. "An IOU for a gaggle of demons? Names have power and all of that?" Hans glared at Miles, who enjoyed draining some of the superiority from the pompous officer. "Just so," Hans said, snapping his boot heels together and bowing his head towards Miles at a sharp angle. Miles saw the creature had turned to watch him too, with empty, fire-scarred eye sockets. Miles shuddered and looked away, continuing his inquiry. "Well, since my life is quite obviously forfeit, how's this business work exactly? The list you purchased from Nancy over there," Miles pointed his chin at Kenner. "It's, I don't know, a lien on the services of a bunch of demons? A way to leash and point them?" Miles was pleased his voice hadn't cracked asking the question. Hans clapped his hands together and bent his head almost all the way to his right shoulder. "Yes, Englishman. 7 demons, actually," he sighed. "Damn. You really don't know anything about this, do you? I was so looking forward to finding out for myself." Hans whipped his head back to the demon. "Vouchsafe my life and my men's. Promise me you shall not pursue or allow by inaction any tragedy in our bloodlines or in ourselves, and I will free you from the circle for the duration of our compact. That man? That man," Hans pointed to Miles. "Him you may interfere with however you wish once outside the circle." This was going balls up, shockingly quickly, yet Miles couldn't think what to do about it. He felt a tremble in his knees, and animal fear raced up and down his spine, urging him to run. A gentleman's agreement, a council of war of like-minded allies of Germany and other foreign nations, that he could understand and debate. But this... He beat down the savage behind his thoughts and forced his mind back on track. What leverage could he use against these enemies? What little niceties could he draw into question to distract them, give them quarrel with each other that he could take advantage of? This was basic strategy of spycraft. But he hadn't a clue what form an agreement with a pack of demons should take, let alone how he would derail it. Miles settled for not wetting himself when the demon turned its eyeless gaze back on him, even as it fell to its knees before Hans.
"You have my name. Command me."
"Good. You may seal our bargain with his blood." Hans pointed at Miles. The creature rose from its kneel and turned to Miles without haste, its monstrous form as agile as a dancer's. "Bugger," Miles thought, as whimpers came from the soldiers close behind him. He wished he could spare just a moment to express his own bowel-churning fear, but instead he led with his gut. "Only 1 demon, Hans. Didn't you just order 6 more?" "It won't take more to see you dead," Hans said, as his pet demon approached the blood-soaked threshold in front of Miles. "The others will come when I need them, never fear. They're mine as long as I can speak their names." The monster raised 1 foot. It ended in a hoof, Miles saw, and stepped across the line of blood. Though perhaps I'll save one, Hans called cheerily, just to visit London town. Not bloody likely, Miles thought. He feinted to his right, then jerked back to his left to avoid the demon's reaching hands. To their credit, 2 of Hans's soldiers shouted warning to him, but they couldn't shoot him down without risking their leader. Hans was too surprised to move as Miles crossed the few yards between them quickly, a hand raised high, fist balled tight as he closed the distance. "Stop him, creature!" roared Hans, too shocked to do more than raise his hands to deflect the expected blow. Miles jerked his feet to a stop inside the circle, reached out for Hans, and swiped the yellow parchment from his grip. Then he reared out and kicked Hans in the side, sending him stumbling to the ground. He raised the paper high to read it in the flickering red light. It was the Sumerian alphabet. He scanned the list, committing each name to memory as best he could while fearing a bullet in the back at any moment. The shots never came. After he'd whispered each name to himself, he risked a glance up to see the demon standing on the opposite side of the circle's bloody border. The creature stood there, hands in mid-air, as if he were a street mime annoying a crowd of tourists, instead of a creature from the underworld, from which its summoner's trained soldiers were now fleeing in open screaming terror.
"I cannot enter,"
he told Hans.
"The circle is unbroken."
Miles almost smiled at the powerful being stopped in his tracks, but turned his head Hansward, again in time to present his jaw to Kenner's fist. Miles staggered and raised his hands to protect against a knife attack, his instinct for survival making the same mistake as Hans had, even as he damned himself for it, even as he felt Kenner rip at the paper in his hands. Out of the corner of his eye, Miles saw Hans scrambling on all fours to the circle, scrubbing the blood away with his forearms. "Kill them both!" he raged. The paper tore, and half was ripped away. Miles faced no knife, however. Hans earned that honor when he added Kenner's names to the demon's hit list. Kenner threw a fluid stroke, and whatever Hans had planned to say next was replaced with a gurgle as Kenner's blade buried itself deep in the side of his neck. The knife didn't rest long. It was quickly recovered by its owner, leaving Hans sinking to the floor, clutching his neck as Kenner ran past him towards the piano. Miles felt the ground shake close behind, and knew the demon was upon him. He rolled to face it, and saw and smelled bits of flesh in its claws as the nightmare reared one hand back to slash at him. "Kestrel!" Miles called, rushing the words to stay the hand falling out towards him. "Callias! Ferenchen! Sire!" The hands fell, a blur Miles closed his eyes to hide from, using the last of his breath to name his would-be killer. "Joel!" The blow never came. Miles cracked his eyes to stare up at the beast, who nodded.
"You have my name. Command me."
A shiver of terror still rippling up and down his spine, Miles drew a ragged gasp of sweet air. He hauled himself to his feet, shivering and looking around to see the room empty, except for Hans bleeding on the floor. The roar of an engine, prop sputtering, then catching, came through the open door. Kenner was making good an escape onto the German Zeppelin with half the list. Miles twitched with adrenaline and a fear, quickly turning to bloodlust. He mulled sending the beast after Kenner. He could sit on the patio and listen to his tormentor scream as he succumbed to whatever death Miles felt like ordering. So easy. It would be so... Miles felt his lip curl in revulsion. What was he thinking, using the demon as a tool? Some small warning voice of his conscience cried out that it would be cowardly, unmanly. There would be no honor or glory in a victory sullied by such dark hands. He struggled to his feet, the more practical part of his nature cursing his principles for those of a fool. How satisfying it would be to rain destruction over Hans and his ilk, to set the demon and its still untapped brethren loose, to seek out his spies' masters and where they plotted from the shadows in Germany, and pluck them from the earth. Do it, Miles thought to himself again, standing over Hans, who stared up where he lay, clutching blood-slick hands around his neck, staring up with hateful eyes. Miles was very sure the German would show no kindness if the tables were turned. He opened his mouth to address the demon and sentence the German, but the words wouldn't come. Perhaps he was a fool, but first and foremost Miles sought to keep his honor. He knew the rules he wished to live his life by. "Damn it all," he muttered. "It appears, Hans, that I am the better man." He stepped over the fallen spy, rushing for the patio. "Go back where you came from, demon," he called over his shoulder. "We have no use for you here." Miles grabbed the pane of the open patio door and swung himself out, crouching to gather the lay of the land before making a charge. Miles saw Kenner in the brightly lit cabin hanging below the Zeppelin, his knife flashing at the neck of the uniformed captain of the flying machine. And then he watched the hat fall from the man's head, the man's use obviously at an end with the engine powered and the cabin straining at the mooring lines. Blood sprayed from his neck, and then Kenner pushed the now-dead weight through an open window to bleed down the cabin's black side. A squeal of pain jerked Miles's head around. The demon, Jewel, knelt over Hans, his claws racking again and again through the man's middle. "Stop!" as the demon drew lengths of gut from the still thrashing man.
"As you command, Miles Bell,"
Jewel said, standing straight. His smile dripped blood and ripped flesh, steaming in the cold wind from the open door.
"There was always a cost to be paid,"
he said, his eyeless sockets watching Miles, savoring the horror growing there as one hoof ground into the hole in Hans's side. Mercifully, the spy's legs ceased their twitching. The demon faded, the room showing through its body.
"Remember our names, Miles Bell. You will call on us,"
the demon taunted, as it slowly faded from the world.
"Mortals always do, once your short lives are scarred enough to meet our price."
The words echoed through the now empty ruin of the room. Miles turned away from the horror and reached for the door. Better natures be damned. It was time to deal with Kenner. The List, Part 3.